Snake question: what kind of biological life consists of the White Cliffs of Dover? AKA, what are the White Cliffs of Dover made from?
Middle. Okay. Well, before we go into the biological makeup, let's talk about the chemical makeup, because you'll find that the White Cliffs of Dover are 98% calcium carbonate. In other words, they are practically pure calcium carbonate, and that presents a problem if you want to try and go along with the standard definition of how things like chalk forms. Now, chalk is a form of limestone. Limestone is characterized by its calcium carbonate composition, but chalk, like the White Cliffs of Dover, tends to be a very, very pure limestone, right? Think of your white chalkboard chalk that you use to write with. Now, the standard story of chalk formation is that you have a shallow sea. The shallow sea has lots of marine life in it. The marine life, many of it is microscopic. These microscopic creatures called coccolithophores are covered in tiny little shells called coccoliths. The shells fall off, they sink down to the bottom, and over vast periods of time, they build up into calcareous ooze. The calcareous ooze, which is a fantastic term, builds up over vast periods of time until it gets compressed down into chalk. Now, again, be wary of the present is the key to the past, because we have calcareous ooze deposits today. You can go and see them, and they are not pure calcium carbonate. For one simple reason, it takes long periods of time to build up calcareous ooze. And so what you get mixed in with the calcareous ooze is things like fish poo, fish scales, gunk and grime and sediment and dirt, and it's pretty horrible, grey, boggy, nasty stuff. Okay, when you're dealing with something like the White Cliffs of Dover, which is practically pure calcium carbonate and is very pure, that's their characteristic thing, right? What it tells you is that a different process has produced the White Cliffs of Dover. Okay, what's its biological makeup? Well, it is predominantly made up of fossils, right? These tiny little coccolith shells, these tiny little shells which are made themselves of calcium carbonate, these little coccolith shells, and mixed up in the White Cliffs of Dover are lots and lots of other kinds of sea life. Giant great big ammonites, seashells, belemnites, brachiopods, bivalves, and so on and so forth, right? Sometimes even sharks get caught up in it. Now, in order to bury and preserve a great big fossil like an enormous, we're talking like, 4 foot across ammonite in some cases, nearly 1.5 meters long, these kind of ammonites need to be buried very quickly. You can't have them lying around for vast periods of time. They're just going to be destroyed. Now, it was Professor Derek Ager who actually made the point about the White Cliffs of Dover. If you actually calculate the chalk formation, you get ludicrous results like 0.002 millimeters of deposition per year, according to the dates. Now, you're never going to get a fossil if those dates are correct. So, number one, yes, you have lots of biological life. We call them fossils today because they're compressed and they're fossilized. They're either turned into stone, entrapped in stone, buried in the chalk. Secondly, most of the chalk is made up of once biological material. So it tells you that something different has happened than what we have experienced today, both in the volume of sea life as well as the environment. And thirdly, the fact that you have all of this together and it's so pure tells you that something different has happened in terms of the formation rather than the standard calcareous ooze. Now, there's two potential explanations for the chalk formation. One of them is something that was proposed by a geologist called John Matthews. You'll find that the chalk is generally speaking, creation geologists agree that the chalk is one of the topmost level, the last level of sediments to be formed. So one of the suggestions is that you have a planktonic bloom at the end of a global flood, and as the land rises up out of the sea, it traps the chalk. However, there was a rather interesting paper that came out a couple of years ago because it talked about how flowing water can actually produce limestone. And it was never thought before that flowing water could produce limestone because you interpret it as a shallow sea that slowly settles down. But one of the most interesting comments from this paper was that conventional wisdom has prevented us from considering flowing water as being a key to limestone formation. Now, what is this conventional wisdom they're talking about? It's the present is the key to the past uniformitarianism millions of years. It turns out that flowing water can indeed produce calcium carbonate deposits like chalk and limestone, and so we're straight back into a global flood for sure. John, any comments?
Yes, having climbed up and down the cliffs many times and taken you there as well. You remember the fossil thorn that I found?
Oh, yes, indeed.
There?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've got fossil thorns, land plants, and we've also, one year I found a standing upright ammonite, vertically standing up. And if you're going to have all of these nice little microscopic creatures losing their shells and standing up to hold this ammonite up, it's an impossibility. So again, we get back to Derek Ager saying, if you have a slow rate, use the dates. Something's very wrong with the dates. It means it's very wrong with the mechanism. That ammonite would have fallen over and simply be lying on its side, but it wasn't. It was vertical, and the thorn was actually embedded in the things as well. And I think, if I remember correctly from my collection, you probably got it over there, I found a nice big fish poo. And at a slow rate of deposition, it simply wouldn't make it down to the present. Sadly, I've got to say, they've blocked off all of that section where we did such wonderful collecting for years. Correct, Joe?
So again, sorry, missed that last bit.
They've blocked off all of that section where we had that
great
cliff fall.
Yes,
sadly.
you can't access it hardly at all anymore, which is sad. But you can still join Creation Research for field trips. We're holding our big convention this year, which we'll start to advertise next week. But there's details on our UK Creation Research website. 5 days going and digging up fossils on the Yorkshire Jurassic Coast. So even though they've blocked off that place, there's still plenty of other places to find chalk and limestone and fossils throughout the UK and indeed throughout the whole world. So good stuff.